A construction crew breaking ground for a new housing development 30 miles outside Boston had absolutely no idea that their excavators would uncover one of Massachusetts's most haunting and disturbing mysteries. On a cold February morning in 2024, heavy machinery struck something that wasn't rock or roots or any other typical obstruction. When workers investigated more closely, they discovered human remains that had been hidden away in a shallow grave for 6 long years, buried in a location so remote and isolated that no one had thought to search there during the intensive investigation of 2018. The discovery would finally answer the question that had tormented a family and baffled investigators for years. What happened to Madison Clark on the night she left her dormitory to meet her best friend and never came home? But the answers would prove more disturbing than anyone had imagined, revealing a truth about friendship, jealousy, and betrayal that would shock even the most experienced detectives who had seen countless cases. Madison Clark had trusted the person she was meeting that March evening in 2018. She had walked willingly into the night, believing she was going to repair a friendship that had meant everything to her since high school years. The text messages found on her phone showed a young woman eager to make peace, to move past a disagreement, to restore the bond she cherished deeply. She had no way of knowing that the friend waiting for her had very different intentions and plans. Before we reveal what investigators discovered about that fatal night and the shocking truth about what really happened to Madison Clark, make sure you're subscribed to our channel and hit that notification bell. Today's story will take you through a case that reminds us that sometimes the greatest danger doesn't come from strangers lurking in dark alleys, but from the people we trust most in our lives. This is the story of Madison Clark, a brilliant medical student with a golden future stretching before her, and the friend who may have taken it all away in one terrible night. In March of 2018, Madison Elizabeth Clark was 23 years old and in her 3rd year at Boston University School of Medicine, one of the most prestigious medical programs in the entire country. Standing 5 feet 7 inches tall, with long, straight blonde hair that she usually wore, pulled back in a practical ponytail, Madison had bright green eyes, a warm and genuine smile, and the kind of focused determination that made her professors predict she would become an exceptional physician. Madison had grown up in Newton, Massachusetts, an affluent suburb just west of Boston, as the eldest of 3 children in a close-knit family. Her father, Richard Clark, was a cardiovascular surgeon at Massachusetts General Hospital, while her mother, Jennifer Clark, had been a pediatric nurse before, choosing to focus on raising their children full-time. Madison had 2 younger siblings, a sister, Emily, who was 20 years old and studying psychology at Tufts University, and a brother, Ryan, who was 17 and in his senior year of high school in 2018. From an early age, Madison had known she wanted to follow in her father's footsteps into the field of medicine. But unlike some children of doctors who feel pressured into the profession, Madison's passion for healing was entirely her own genuine calling. She had volunteered at local hospitals throughout her high school years, shadowed various physicians in different specialties, and spent one summer working at a medical clinic in rural Guatemala, an experience that had solidified her determination to specialize in emergency medicine, where she could help people in their most critical moments. At Boston University, Madison had quickly established herself as one of the top students in her entire class. She maintained a near-perfect grade point average, while also serving as president of the Student Medical Association and volunteering at a free clinic in Dorchester every Saturday, without fail. Her professors described her as brilliant but humble, competitive yet collaborative, and possessed of the rare combination of intellectual rigor and genuine compassion that makes for truly great doctors who can both diagnose and heal. Despite her demanding and rigorous schedule, Madison maintained an active social life and close friendships with many people. Her roommate, Sarah Martinez, later told investigators that Madison had a special gift for making people feel heard and valued, that she remembered small details about everyone's lives, and that she could lighten the mood of any study session with her dry sense of humor and spot-on impressions of their more eccentric professors. But Madison's closest friendship, the relationship that had defined much of her life since she was 14 years old, was with Brittany Nicole Johnson. The two girls had met during their freshman year at Newton North High School and had bonded immediately over their shared love of science, their competitive spirits, and their dreams of careers in healthcare. Throughout high school, they had been inseparable, studying together, going to movies, sharing secrets, and supporting each other through the typical dramas of adolescence that all teenagers experience. Brittany had been the more outgoing and socially confident of the pair, while Madison was more introverted and studious by nature. Their personalities had complemented each other perfectly, or so it seemed to everyone around them. They had made plans to attend the same college, to be roommates, to support each other through the challenging pre-med curriculum that awaited them. But their paths had diverged when Madison received a full scholarship to Boston University, while Brittany enrolled at a smaller state school after not being accepted to her first-choice universities. The divergence had created the first subtle tensions in their friendship that would only grow over time. While Madison thrived at Boston University, Brittany struggled with the pre-med requirements at her college and eventually switched her major to nursing. Madison had been supportive and encouraging throughout this transition, repeatedly telling Brittany that nursing was a noble and challenging profession that required dedication and skill. But friends later reported that Brittany had seemed resentful of Madison's success and had made increasingly bitter comments about people who have everything handed to them on silver platters. By 2018, both young women were established in their respective programs, Madison excelling in medical school, Brittany completing her nursing degree. They still saw each other regularly, meeting for coffee or dinner every few weeks, but the easy closeness of their high school years had been replaced by something more strained and complicated. Madison's roommate, Sarah, noticed that Madison often seemed stressed after spending time with Brittany, that she would come back from their meetings seeming drained rather than energized, the way time with true friends should leave you feeling. The breaking point had come in late February of 2018, though the exact nature of the disagreement remained somewhat unclear even to those closest to Madison. Madison had confided in Sarah that she and Brittany had experienced a huge fight about something Brittany had said regarding Madison's family and her privileged life. Madison had been hurt and angry, feeling that Brittany had diminished all her hard work and sacrifice by attributing her success solely to her family's advantages rather than her own efforts. For 2 weeks, the friends didn't speak to each other at all. Madison focused on her upcoming exams and her clinical rotations, throwing herself into her studies with even more intensity than usual. But she missed Brittany terribly, despite everything. Sarah later told investigators that Madison had talked constantly about the friendship, about all the years they'd shared together, about how Brittany had been there for her during some of the hardest moments of her life. When Madison received a text message from Brittany on March 14, 2018, suggesting they meet to talk things through and fix this, Madison had been overjoyed and relieved. She showed Sarah the message, excited that Brittany wanted to reconcile, relieved that they could put the argument behind them and restore their friendship to what it had been. Sarah remembered feeling vaguely uneasy about Madison's eagerness to make peace, but she didn't say anything, not wanting to dampen her roommate's happiness and excitement. Madison Clark was, by all accounts from everyone who knew her, one of those rare people who made the world better simply by being in it. She was brilliant, without being arrogant about her intelligence, ambitious without being ruthless in pursuing her goals, and kind without being naive, or so everyone thought. She had a loving family, supportive friends, a calling she was passionate about, and a future that seemed limitless in its possibilities. On the evening of March 14, 2018, Madison left her dormitory wearing jeans, a Boston University sweatshirt, and her favorite gray peacoat, her blonde hair pulled back in her usual ponytail. She was smiling as she left, telling Sarah she'd be back in a couple of hours, that she was going to fix things with Brittany, and everything would go back to normal between them. But Madison Clark would never return to her dormitory, never complete her medical degree, never fulfill the promise of the extraordinary life she had been building. And the friend she trusted would become the central figure in a mystery that would haunt everyone who knew Madison for the next 6 long years. Wednesday, March 14, 2018, began as a typical day for Madison Clark in every way. She woke at 6 o'clock in the morning in her dormitory room at Boston University, went for a quick run along the Charles River despite the cold morning air, and was in her first class, Advanced Pathophysiology, by 8:30 in the morning. Her roommate, Sarah Martinez, later told investigators that Madison had seemed in good spirits that morning, energized by the prospect of reconciling with Brittany later that evening. The text message exchange that would prove crucial to the entire investigation had begun at 9:47 in the morning when Brittany sent Madison a message. "Hey, I've been thinking a lot about our fight. I really miss you. Can we meet tonight to talk? I want to fix this." Madison had responded almost immediately with enthusiasm. "Yes, I miss you too. I really want things to go back to normal." The messages continued throughout the day as the two friends made plans for their meeting. Brittany suggested they meet at the Daily Grind, a coffee shop located about 10 blocks from Madison's dormitory on Commonwealth Avenue. It was a place they had gone to often during their high school years when visiting Boston, a location that held happy memories for both of them. They agreed to meet at 8 o'clock in the evening. Madison's day proceeded normally in every respect. She attended her afternoon clinical rotation at Boston Medical Center, where she was learning emergency medicine procedures under the supervision of attending physicians. Dr. Rebecca Foster, the physician overseeing Madison's rotation that day, later told investigators that Madison had been fully focused and engaged, showing no signs of stress or distraction whatsoever. Madison had left the hospital at 5:30 in the evening, taking the T back to her dormitory. Back in her room by 6:15 in the evening, Madison showered and changed into casual clothes, jeans, her Boston University sweatshirt, and her favorite gray peacoat. Sarah remembered that Madison had been excited, but also slightly nervous about the meeting ahead. She kept checking her phone, Sarah later told police, and she was practicing what she wanted to say to Brittany, how she wanted to apologize for her part in the argument and move forward together. At 7:30 in the evening, Madison received another text from Brittany. "Running a few minutes late. Can we meet at 8:30 instead? And actually, there's a different place I want to try, that new cafe on Beacon Street, closer to where I parked. Is that okay?" Madison responded, "Sure, no problem. Send me the exact address." Brittany replied with an address, 142 Beacon Street. It's called Harmony Cafe. See you there. Madison left her dormitory at 7:50 in the evening, telling Sarah she'd be back by 10:30 in the evening at the latest because she had an early class the next morning. Sarah watched from their window as Madison walked down the street, her blonde ponytail swinging, her hands in her pockets against the March chill. It was the last time Sarah would see her roommate alive. The walk from Madison's dormitory to the address Brittany had provided was approximately 15 blocks through the Boston streets. Security cameras from various businesses along Commonwealth Avenue captured Madison's journey in fragments. At 7:58 in the evening, she was seen stopping at a crosswalk. At 8:09 in the evening, she passed a bank's ATM camera. At 8:17 in the evening, she walked past a convenience store, checking her phone as she walked. The final security camera footage of Madison Clark showed her at 8:23 in the evening, walking alone on Beacon Street, still checking her phone, appearing to be looking for a specific address. She walked past the camera's range, heading east on Beacon Street, and was never seen alive again by any witness or camera. What investigators would later discover was chilling and deeply disturbing. There was no cafe called Harmony Cafe at 142 Beacon Street. The address Brittany had sent Madison was a vacant storefront between two other businesses, a location with no security cameras and limited foot traffic at night. The area was poorly lit, with a narrow alley running beside the vacant building providing cover and concealment. When Madison didn't return to her dormitory by 11 o'clock in the evening, Sarah Martinez began to worry seriously. She tried calling Madison's phone repeatedly, but got no answer whatsoever. She sent multiple text messages that went unread. By midnight, Sarah was genuinely frightened and called Madison's parents in Newton. Richard and Jennifer Clark received the call at 12:15 in the morning on Thursday, March 15th. Richard immediately tried calling Madison's phone, while Jennifer began calling hospitals throughout the Boston area. When they couldn't reach their daughter through any means, Richard drove from Newton to Boston University, arriving at Madison's dormitory at 1 o'clock in the morning. By 1:30 in the morning, Richard Clark was at the Boston Police Department District 4 station, reporting his daughter missing. The desk sergeant, noting that Madison had been gone for less than 6 hours and was a responsible adult, initially suggested waiting until morning. But Richard Clark, a respected surgeon with connections throughout Boston's medical community, insisted on immediate action. He explained that his daughter would never fail to return to her dormitory without calling, that she had an early class the next morning, and that her complete silence was completely out of character. Detective Lisa Chen, a 12-year veteran of the Boston Police Department's Missing Persons Unit, was called in at 2 o'clock in the morning to take the case. After interviewing Richard Clark and speaking by phone with Sarah Martinez, Detective Chen agreed that the circumstances warranted immediate investigation. Madison's responsible nature, her important commitments, and her sudden complete silence all suggested that something was seriously wrong. The first step was to ping Madison's cell phone to determine its location. At 2:45 in the morning, technicians were able to determine that Madison's phone was stationary at a location in the Fenway neighborhood, approximately 2 miles from where she was supposed to have met Brittany. A patrol car was dispatched immediately to the location to investigate. At 3:20 in the morning, officers found Madison's iPhone in a public trash can on Lansdowne Street, near Fenway Park. The phone's battery was nearly dead, and the last activity had been at 8:47 in the evening, just 24 minutes after the final security camera footage of Madison. The phone had received numerous calls and texts from Sarah, Martinez, and Madison's parents, all completely unanswered. The discovery of Madison's discarded phone transformed the case from a potential misunderstanding into a likely crime. Detective Chen immediately expanded the investigation, calling in additional officers and requesting all available security camera footage from the area where Madison was last seen. At 4 o'clock in the morning, Detective Chen made the call that would place Brittany Johnson at the center of the investigation. When Brittany answered her phone, she sounded sleepy and confused. "Madison?" she said, when Detective Chen asked if she had seen Madison Clark that evening. "No, we were supposed to meet, but she never showed up. I waited at the cafe for like 45 minutes and then went home. Is everything okay? Is Madison all right?" Detective Chen asked Brittany to come to the police station immediately for an interview. Brittany arrived at 5:30 in the morning, accompanied by her father. What she told, investigators would raise immediate suspicions and set the course for an investigation that would last 6 years. In the interview room at District 4, Brittany Johnson appeared nervous, but cooperative. She was 23 years old, with dark brown hair cut in a short bob, and wore sweatpants and a hoodie, as if she'd dressed hastily. Detective Chen noted in her report that Brittany seemed genuinely surprised to learn that Madison was missing, but there were inconsistencies in her story that immediately raised red flags. Brittany claimed that she had arrived at the Daily Grind on Commonwealth Avenue, the original meeting place, at approximately 8:15 in the evening, and had waited there until 9 o'clock in the evening, repeatedly texting Madison and trying to call her. When Madison never showed up, Brittany said she had assumed Madison had changed her mind about reconciling and had decided to stand her up as revenge for their earlier argument. Detective Chen showed Brittany the text messages from Madison's phone, including the exchange about changing the meeting location to Harmony Cafe on Beacon Street. Brittany's reaction was crucial. She appeared confused, then adamant. "I never sent those messages. I told her the Daily Grind. I don't know any cafe on Beacon Street, and I definitely didn't send her a different address." When Detective Chen showed Brittany her own phone records, which showed texts sent to Madison's number at 7:30 in the evening. From Brittany's phone, Brittany maintained that she hadn't sent them. "Someone must have hacked my phone or spoofed my number," she insisted. "I was at the Daily Grind the whole time, waiting for Madison." The investigation moved quickly as dawn broke over Boston. Detective Chen's team pulled security footage from the Daily Grind coffee shop. The footage confirmed that Brittany had indeed been there, but she had arrived at 8:45 in the evening, 30 minutes later than she claimed, and had stayed for only 20 minutes, leaving at 9:05 in the evening. During that time, she had been on her phone almost constantly, but she hadn't appeared to be watching the door or looking for someone who was expected to arrive. More concerning was what the footage showed about Brittany's demeanor and behavior. She hadn't seemed anxious or disappointed, like someone being stood up by a friend. She had seemed calm, almost satisfied, checking her phone with what the lead investigator later described as a small smile. Security camera footage from along Beacon Street was collected and analyzed frame by frame. While there were gaps in coverage, investigators were able to track Madison's path toward the fake address. But there was no footage of Brittany anywhere near Beacon Street that evening, or at least none that clearly showed her. One camera captured a figure in dark clothing and a hood walking in the same general area around 8:15 in the evening, but the image quality was too poor to make a positive identification. Madison's phone records revealed something deeply disturbing. The texts changing the meeting location had indeed come from Brittany's phone number, but when technicians examined the metadata, they found something unusual. The messages had been sent using a text spoofing application that could make messages appear to come from any number. However, Brittany's actual phone had been used to install and access this application just 2 days before Madison's disappearance. When confronted with this evidence, Brittany requested a lawyer and stopped answering questions immediately. Her father, a corporate attorney, immediately hired a criminal defense lawyer, and Brittany refused to speak with investigators without counsel present. The Boston Police Department launched an intensive search effort involving dozens of officers. K-9 units were brought in to search the area around where Madison was last seen and where her phone was found. Dive teams searched the Charles River. Volunteers combed through parks, vacant buildings, and wooded areas throughout the Boston metropolitan area. Media coverage exploded across the region and then nationally. Madison's photo, a beautiful young woman with a bright smile and her whole future ahead of her, appeared on every local news broadcast and in newspapers across Massachusetts. The story had everything that captured public attention. A brilliant medical student, a suspicious friend, mysterious text messages, and a complete disappearance. Tips poured into the police hotline by the hundreds. Dozens of reported sightings of Madison came in from across New England, all of which were investigated thoroughly and found to be false alarms. Madison's family appeared on national television, pleading for any information about their daughter's whereabouts. Her father, Richard, usually composed and professional, broke down on camera, begging whoever had taken Madison to let her come home. But despite the massive search effort, the media attention, and the increasingly focused investigation of Brittany Johnson, not a single piece of physical evidence connected Brittany to Madison's disappearance beyond the suspicious text messages and the inconsistencies in her story. There was no body, no crime scene, no witnesses who had seen them together that night. Brittany maintained her innocence, insisting through her lawyer that she had nothing to do with Madison's disappearance and that the text-spoofing evidence was circumstantial at best. Without a body or direct evidence, prosecutors concluded they didn't have enough to charge her with a crime. After 3 weeks of intensive investigation, Brittany was released from being a person of interest, though detectives privately remained convinced of her involvement. Madison Clark had simply vanished into thin air, and for 6 years, her family would live in agonizing uncertainty, not knowing if their daughter was alive or dead, held somewhere against her will, or buried in an unmarked grave. The answers they desperately sought would remain hidden until that February morning in 2024, when construction equipment uncovered the truth 30 miles from where Madison had last been seen. As 2018 turned into 2019, the intensive search for Madison Clark gradually transitioned from active investigation to cold case status, though it never truly went cold in the hearts of those who knew her. The Boston Police Department kept the file open, with Detective Lisa Chen continuing to follow up on leads and periodically re-interviewing potential witnesses. But without new evidence or Madison's body, there was little forward movement in the case. The Clark family refused to accept that their daughter was gone forever. Richard Clark took a leave of absence from his position at Massachusetts General Hospital, unable to concentrate on surgery when his own daughter's fate remained unknown. Jennifer Clark transformed their Newton home into an unofficial command center for the search, covering the walls with maps, timelines, and photographs. Their younger children, Emily and Ryan, struggled to move forward with their own lives, while the question of what happened to Madison hung over every family gathering. In August of 2018, just 5 months after Madison's disappearance, Brittany Johnson graduated from nursing school and accepted a position at a hospital in Portland, Oregon, as far from Boston as she could get, while remaining in the continental United States. She deleted all her social media accounts and cut off contact with everyone from her Newton and Boston social circles, including mutual friends who had known both her and Madison. Detective Chen found Brittany's sudden departure suspicious, but there was nothing illegal about moving to another state. Chen traveled to Portland twice to conduct follow-up interviews, but Brittany's lawyer was always present, and Brittany maintained her story. She had nothing to do with Madison's disappearance. She was traumatized by losing her best friend, and she had moved to escape the constant suspicion and harassment from people who believed she was responsible. The case gained significant national media attention throughout 2019 and 2020. Madison's story was featured on several true crime television programs, including a 2-hour special on 48 Hours that examined the evidence against Brittany and interviewed forensic experts about the text spoofing technology. The episode generated thousands of new tips, but none led to Madison or provided concrete evidence of what had happened to her. Online true crime communities dissected every aspect of the case with obsessive detail. Amateur investigators analyzed the security camera footage, frame by frame, created detailed timelines of both Madison's and Brittany's movements, and debated theories about what might have happened. Some believed Brittany had acted alone, luring Madison to a location where she could harm her. Others theorized that Brittany might have had an accomplice helping her. A few outliers suggested Madison had been the victim of random violence, and that Brittany's involvement was coincidental, though this theory was widely dismissed given the spoofed text messages. The investigation took on new dimensions as technology advanced. In 2020, Detective Chen worked with the FBI's Digital Forensics Unit to conduct a more sophisticated analysis of the text messages and phone records. They confirmed that the text spoofing application had been installed on Brittany's phone and used to send the messages directing Madison to the fake address. But they couldn't prove beyond reasonable doubt that Brittany herself had been the one to use the application. Theoretically, someone else could have accessed her phone. In 2021, the Boston Police Department received a grant to form a dedicated cold case unit, and Madison's case was one of the first to be assigned to the new team. Detective Michael Anderson, a specialist in cases involving digital evidence, took over as lead investigator, while Detective Chen served as a consultant. Anderson brought fresh eyes to the evidence and identified several avenues that hadn't been fully explored. One significant development came in late 2021, when Anderson discovered that Brittany had been researching true crime cases involving missing persons in the weeks before Madison's disappearance. Her internet search history, which had been preserved by her service provider, showed queries for how long until someone is declared dead, missing person investigations without a body, and famous unsolved disappearances. Brittany's lawyer argued this was circumstantial. Many people were interested in true crime, and Brittany's searches could have been unrelated to Madison. Throughout these years, the Clark family endured the special torture of not knowing. They couldn't properly grieve because they didn't know for certain that Madison was dead. They couldn't move forward because hope, however faint, kept them anchored to the possibility that somehow, impossibly, Madison might still be alive. Richard eventually returned to work, but colleagues noticed he was changed, more somber, less engaged. Emily struggled with survivor's guilt and developed anxiety disorder, constantly worrying about her own safety and that of her loved ones. Ryan, who had been just 17 when his sister disappeared, became obsessed with the case, spending hours on true crime forums and even attempting his own amateur investigations. The media attention would spike periodically on the anniversary of Madison's disappearance, when there were new developments in the investigation, or when similar cases occurred elsewhere. Each spike brought renewed hope that someone would come forward with information, but each time the attention would fade without resolution. By 2023, 5 years after Madison's disappearance, the case seemed destined to join the ranks of unsolved mysteries that haunt families and investigators forever. Brittany Johnson was working as a nurse in Portland, living what appeared to be a normal life, though she remained estranged from everyone who had known her in Massachusetts. The Clark family had established a foundation in Madison's name that provided scholarships for medical students, channeling their grief into something that honored their daughter's dreams. Detective Anderson continued to review the case periodically, hoping that advancing forensic technology might reveal something new in the existing evidence. But without Madison's body, without a clear crime scene, and without witnesses or physical evidence linking Brittany to whatever had happened, the case remained frustratingly out of reach. And then, on a cold February morning in 2024, everything changed. February 8, 2024, was a Thursday, and the construction crew working on the new Meadowbrook Heights development in Framingham, Massachusetts, about 30 miles southwest of Boston, was beginning excavation for the foundation of the development's first phase. The site had formerly been farmland that had sat unused for years before being sold to a development company in 2023. At approximately 10:30 in the morning, excavator operator James Wilson noticed something unusual in the dirt his machine had just moved. Years of experience had taught him to recognize when something wasn't rock or roots or any other typical obstruction. He stopped the machine and climbed down to investigate. What he found made his blood run cold. Partially exposed in the excavated soil were what appeared to be human bones, along with fragments of fabric and what looked like the sole of a sneaker. James immediately contacted his supervisor, who called 911. By 11 o'clock in the morning, the Framingham Police Department had secured the scene, and by noon, the Massachusetts State Police Crime Scene Services section had arrived with their forensic anthropology team. The excavation of the remains took 2 full days, conducted with painstaking care to preserve any potential evidence. What investigators discovered was a shallow grave, approximately 3 feet deep, containing the skeletal remains of a young adult female. The body had been wrapped in a tarp and buried in a location that, in 2018, had been surrounded by dense undergrowth and trees, a remote section of the farmland property far from any roads or buildings. Personal effects found with the remains included fragments of clothing that matched what Madison had been wearing the night she disappeared. Jeans, a sweatshirt, a gray peacoat. Most significantly, a P-tie, a Boston University student ID card, though damaged and discolored by years in the ground, was found among the remains. The name on the ID, Madison Elizabeth Clark. The news reached the Clark family on the evening of February 9th, when Detective Anderson arrived at their Newton home. Richard and Jennifer Clark had spent 6 years hoping against hope that their daughter might somehow still be alive, that she might walk through their door one day with an explanation for her absence. The POO notification that remains had been found that appeared to be Madison's was simultaneously the end of that hope and the beginning of a different kind of closure. DNA analysis confirmed what the ID card and clothing suggested. On February 15, 2024, nearly 6 years after Madison Clark had disappeared, the Massachusetts State Medical Examiner officially identified the remains as those of Madison Elizabeth Clark. The Clark family could finally, painfully, begin to truly grieve. But the discovery of Madison's body also reignited the investigation into her death. The forensic examination revealed crucial information. Madison had died from blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with being struck multiple times with a heavy object. The injuries suggested a violent assault rather than an accident. Marks on the bones indicated that the body had been moved after death, and that significant effort had been made to conceal it. Most significantly, the location of the grave raised immediate questions. The farmland in Framingham was over 30 miles from where Madison was last seen in Boston. How had her body ended up there? Who would have known about this remote location? And how had the perpetrator transported Madison's body without being seen? Detective Anderson and his team immediately focused their renewed investigation on Brittany Johnson. A deep dive into Brittany's history revealed something that had been missed during the initial investigation. In 2017, Brittany had briefly dated a man whose family owned property adjacent to the Framingham farmland, where Madison's body was found. While Brittany and the man had broken up months before Madison's disappearance, Brittany would have been familiar with the area and known about the remote, unused section of farmland. When confronted with this information during a new round of questioning in Portland, Brittany maintained her innocence but refused to answer specific questions about the Framingham property. Her lawyer argued that knowing about the area didn't prove Brittany had been responsible for Madison's death, and that the evidence remained circumstantial. Cell phone records from March 14, 2018, were re-examined with more advanced technology. While Brittany's phone had shown her in the area of the Daily Grind Cafe in Boston around 8:45 in the evening that night, as she had claimed, there was a gap in the phone's location data between 7:30 in the evening and 8:30 in the evening, exactly the window when Madison had disappeared. The phone had either been turned off during that time or had been in an area with no cell coverage. Forensic experts reanalyzed the crime scene where Madison's remains were found, looking for any physical evidence that might link Brittany to the location. They found fibers, soil samples, and other trace evidence, but after 6 years in the ground, connecting that evidence to a specific person would be extraordinarily difficult, if not impossible. The discovery of Madison's body made national headlines once again. The image of the construction site where she was found, the renewed focus on Brittany Johnson, and the Clark family's grief all became part of the ongoing public fascination with the case. True crime podcasters and television programs revisited the story with this new information, debating whether the evidence was sufficient to finally bring charges against Brittany. But for the Clark family, the discovery brought a complex mixture of emotions. They finally knew what had happened to Madison, could finally lay her to rest properly. But they also had to accept the brutal reality of how she had died, and the likelihood that they might never see justice for their daughter if prosecutors decided the evidence wasn't strong enough to convict. The forensic analysis conducted throughout March and April of 2024 confirmed what investigators and the Clark family had feared for 6 years. DNA extracted from the skeletal remains definitively matched Madison Elizabeth Clark. The medical examiner determined that Madison had died from severe blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with being struck multiple times with a heavy object. The nature of the injuries made it clear that this was not an accident, but a deliberate, violent assault. However, after 6 years buried in soil exposed to New England's harsh weather cycles, most potential forensic evidence had degraded beyond usefulness. There were no fingerprints, no DNA from a potential perpetrator, no murder weapon recovered at the scene. The tarp that had wrapped Madison's body had deteriorated too extensively to yield useful trace evidence. While soil samples and fiber analysis were conducted, connecting any findings to a specific suspect after so much time proved impossible. The circumstantial evidence against Brittany Johnson was compelling, but remained frustratingly incomplete. The text-spoofing application on her phone, her inconsistent alibi, the gap in her phone's location data, her connection to the area where Madison's body was found, and her suspicious internet searches all pointed toward her involvement. Yet in the American justice system, compelling circumstantial evidence is not the same as proof beyond reasonable doubt. In June of 2024, the Middlesex County District Attorney's Office announced they were continuing to investigate Madison Clark's death, but did not have sufficient evidence to file criminal charges at that time. Brittany Johnson, through her attorney, released a statement expressing sympathy for the Clark family, but maintaining her complete innocence. She claimed that the coincidences investigators had identified were exactly that, coincidences, and that she had been unfairly targeted because she was the last person known to have communicated with Madison. For the Clark family, the lack of charges brought a new kind of anguish. They had finally found Madison, could finally lay her to rest. But the person they believed responsible would face no consequences. Madison was buried in a private ceremony on June 15, 2024, at Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge. Her gravestone reads, Madison Elizabeth Clark, 1995 to 2018, beloved daughter, sister, friend, and future healer. Your light still shines. The case remains officially open, classified as an unsolved homicide. Investigators continue to hope that new evidence might emerge, or that advancing forensic technology might reveal something in the existing evidence that could lead to prosecution. But with each passing year, that possibility becomes more remote. The tragedy of Madison Clark serves as a devastating reminder of how toxic friendships can turn dangerous when jealousy, resentment, and perceived betrayal are left to fester. Friends who knew both young women later spoke about warning signs they had missed or dismissed. Brittany's increasingly bitter comments about Madison's success, her inability to be genuinely happy for her friend's achievements, the way she would undermine Madison's confidence with subtle criticisms disguised as concern. Madison's story also highlights the limitations of the justice system when dealing with cases that lack direct physical evidence. Even when circumstantial evidence strongly suggests a particular suspect, prosecutors must be confident they can prove guilt beyond reasonable doubt to a jury. Without that certainty, cases remain unsolved, and families are left without the justice they desperately seek. The medical career that Madison would have pursued was cut short at 23. The lives she would have saved as an emergency medicine physician will never be saved. The family she might have had, the discoveries she might have made, the difference she might have made in the world. All of it stolen on a cold March night when she trusted the wrong person. For Emily and Ryan Clark, now adults living with the permanent absence of their sister, Madison's death has shaped their lives in profound ways. Emily became an advocate for victims' families, working to reform laws around circumstantial evidence and cold cases. Ryan eventually went to medical school, determined to fulfill the dream his sister never could. The question of what exactly happened during those missing hours on March 14, 2018, may never be fully answered. Where did Madison go after the security cameras lost sight of her? What were her final moments like? Did she realize her friend had betrayed her? Or did death come before understanding? These questions haunt everyone who loved Madison. The truth that shocked investigators and the public wasn't just that Madison may have been murdered by her best friend. It was the realization that years of friendship, shared history, and professed love could coexist with such darkness. That the person Madison trusted most, the friend she was eager to reconcile with, may have been the architect of her destruction. Madison Clark's case remains open, a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous people in our lives are not strangers in dark alleys, but those we invite into our homes and hearts.